And what I will tell you about that game is this. You have my word, okay? We ain't breaking down that game. Okay, there's some games where we got to talk about, okay, with 2 minutes left, this happened, and then Villanova did that, and then Houston did this, and with 6 minutes to go, Kelvin said, no, we ain't doing that. The final score was 50-44, and it was a tough watch, okay? Houston ended up shooting 1 of 20 from 3. It was an ugly game. It was a hideous game. It was a sloppy game. But Villanova did ultimately win this game to now advance to their third Final Four since 2016. And so I want to talk about Villanova, and I want to talk about this team because as the game went final, there were really two things that struck me about Villanova as they get set to go to the Final Four. And unfortunately, there was some unfortunate news. Justin Moore, their second leading scorer, did go out with what we now know is an Achilles injury. He will not be available. And so as great as this Final Four is going to be, I do think it's tough to see Villanova winning another 2 games without arguably their second or third most important player. So that's the disappointing part. But I do want to talk about Villanova as a whole. Because as a basketball program, I had 2 definitive thoughts about this basketball team after watching that game. After Villanova made their third Final Four in the last 6 seasons, the last 6 NCAA tournaments, the last 7 seasons overall, I do believe that Villanova is probably the best basketball program in college basketball, and they are the program that every program should model themselves after, and I want to talk a little bit about that. I also have one other question. Is Jay Wright weirdly underrated as a college basketball coach? It sounds crazy, 2-time national champion, but I truly do believe that Jay Wright is probably a little bit underrated. So let's talk about it because, as I said, Villanova, third Final Four since 2016, fourth under Jay Wright, and they're just an incredible story, right? They had great moments in the 80s, great moments in the 90s. Jay Wright comes, gets them to a Final Four in 2009. I don't want to say they bottomed out, but they had a bad year or two. Jay Wright builds it back up, the new Big East happens, and they have been a force ever since then. But what makes them a model program? And by the way, as we get into this, I want to say this. This isn't a your way of doing things is wrong, they're right, they have older players, you have one and dones, their players love school, their players are great. No, it's not that. But it does seem as though when you make 3 Final Fours in 6 years, when you win 1 million Big East regular season and tournament titles, at some point we got to acknowledge that you are doing something that nobody else is doing. And if everybody says, well, you know, anybody could do what they do. Well, if everybody could do what they do, why has nobody else done it? So let's get into it because I believe that really 3 things happen at Villanova that I don't think anybody does these 3 things as well as Villanova. 1, I believe they are insanely good at the identification process in recruiting. And when I say identification, it's not just talent. It's not just how high you can jump. It's not just what your wingspan is. But are you the right fit for Villanova? There are so many schools. There are a lot of schools that you'd probably be surprised by that strictly recruit off a recruiting ranking, that strictly want to go after 5 stars, that want to go after big names, that want to go after who 24/7 or On3 Sports say are the best players. And then there's a school like Villanova that cares much more about whether you are the right fit for their program than whether you are a 5-star, 4-star, or 3-star, okay? What do I mean by fit? 1, what are you coming to school for? Jay Wright has said this. I think he said it on this podcast when I had him about 6 months ago. Do you want to come to college to actually be a student? Because if you don't like school, Villanova is probably not the place for you. If you don't want to be and by the way, there's nothing wrong with that. You want to go to Overtime Elite, you want to go to the G League, you don't like school. A lot of us didn't like school at 18 years old. I'm not criticizing, I'm not judging. But you don't want to go to school, you don't want to be a student, you don't want to be part of this community, this probably isn't the right place for you. 2, small Catholic school, Philadelphia, that plays a role. 3, you can't dictate to us how quickly you want to be out, okay? And I think this is an important part as well, and it goes back to the 5-star, 4-star, 3-star. Do you want to be at school, and do you want to develop at your own pace? And this isn't a one and done is wrong, and this 4-year players are the only way to do it. But at the same time, Jay Wright has been very vocal about, I think he said at maybe the 2018 Final Four, that there have been kids that come on campus and say, Coach, I'm a one and done. I'm out of here after 1 year. And he says, I don't care how talented you are. I don't think that's even wrong. But you can't come here and say that. You can't tell us that you're going to be gone in a year or 2 because that's not how it operates here. Now, have they had players leave after a year or 2? They have. Jeremiah Robinson-Earl, awesome player on last year's team, left after 2 years. Sadiq Bey the year before, I believe, I could be mistaken, but left after 2 years, maybe 3. Josh Hart left early. So it's not as though guys don't leave early. It's not as though we only take 4-year players and if you want to, no. But it has to be at the right time. It has to be when you're ready. It has to be when you are able to go to the NBA and contribute and have success. Just looking at this team, I was kind of blown away when I saw it all. Colin Gillespie, fifth-year senior. Now, he had an injury late last year. He had to come back. He took his extra COVID year, but he could have gone and tried to go pro. Jermaine Samuel, same thing. Got hurt late last year, decides to come back for another season. Justin Moore, the kid who unfortunately got hurt, third-year junior. Eric Dixon took a red shirt, their best big guy, 6'8", 6'9" down low. Redshirted as a freshman, played the last 2 years. Caleb Daniels, their first guy off the bench who's now going to have to start because Justin Moore is out. He is a fifth-year guy who transferred in from Tulane. So just thinking about that, you have three guys basically in your starting lineup, your top 5 scorers, that are fifth-year guys. Another guy redshirted, another guy is a third-year junior. That's just different. 2, I think they develop as well as anybody in college basketball. And I'm not going to get into all the stats, but just look at Colin Gillespie. He was a small role player on the 2018 national championship team. Now he is the star of another Final Four team in 2022. Ironically, the 2018 national championship team, Jalen Brunson was the national player of the year, was a role player on the 2016 national championship team. So guys come in, they get better, they develop. Again, it goes back to the red shirt. Most of the guys that have gone to the NBA, Dante DiVincenzo took a red shirt. The kid Amari Spellman, who I don't even know if he's still in the NBA, took a red shirt. Eric Paschal, who is in the NBA, took a red shirt. Take your time, develop at your own pace, get better though. And then 3, and we all see it, it's the fundamentals with Villanova are unbelievable. And there are some teams, and again, I'm not criticizing any specific program, but they just got to go out and they got to beat you on talent. And when the shots aren't falling and this isn't happening and that isn't happening, they aren't going to win games. Villanova is better at the fundamentals than anyone that I have seen in college basketball. You watch them, it is like a clinic, and that is why they had success against Houston. Not because they were the better team, not because they were the more athletic team, but because it was ball fakes and dribble and drive and kick, and you just work the ball until you get wide open for a shot, and then the shot goes in and the other team doesn't even know what hit them. So you look at this team, and it is just unbelievable to watch them. They're great at the fundamentals. It's funny. I think I've told this story, and I don't think he'd mind me saying it because he said it on TV, but Villanova played at UCLA earlier this year, and Mike Schmitz, the ESPN draft analyst, was sitting next to me. And I said, Mike, you see everybody. You travel all over the country. Do you see anybody that has better fundamentals than Villanova? And he said, no. He said, if I had a son, this is the team, this is the program that I want him to play for. So to me, Villanova's the model of how you should do it. I'm not saying it's right for everybody. I'm not saying it's perfect for everybody. But the fundamentals of evaluating the right kids, not recruiting strictly off rankings, but personality. Do you want to be developed? Do you want to get better? Are you going to be patient? Are you going to trust the process? That's something that a lot of college basketball programs can learn from. And then again, the simple stuff, the ball fakes, this, that, the other thing, whatever. Beyond that, I do have another question that I've kind of been chewing on over the last couple weeks, really the last day or so. I shouldn't say the last couple weeks. I do have a question, though, and this is going to sound crazy. Is Jay Wright actually underrated? Like, is Jay Wright actually underrated? Because just think about it at its most basic level, and it goes back to what I just said a minute ago. But on Saturday, Villanova clinched its 3rd Final Four in the past 6 seasons. That is insane, okay? And you just think about that at the most basic level. 3rd Final Four last 6 years. And I know we wanted to move on to Coach K, and I knew there were other big stories on Saturday. But Coach K at that point had not made a Final Four since 2015. Villanova had qualified for their 3rd. Tom Izzo, last Final Four 2019, but he's only been to one since 2015. Calipari hasn't been to one since 2015. So 3 Hall of Fame coaches since 2015 have 2 combined Final Fours. Tom Izzo in 2019 and John Calipari or Mike Krzyzewski in 2022. Villanova has 3 in the last 6 years, and when they won, it was just like, oh, Villanova's going to another Final Four. There's Villanova. Look at Villanova. They go to Final Fours. It's what they do. And so I do think Jay Wright is underrated. I do think he's underappreciated. And I do think college basketball fans would tell you he's probably the best coach or one of the 2 or 3 best coaches in college basketball. But I still think he's not talked about enough. Think about how much time we talk about John Calipari, how much time we talk about Coach K, how much time we talked about Hubert Davis this year. We never talk about Jay Wright. And I do believe it's for 2 reasons, and there are 2 reasons that I believe that he is maybe not underrated, but at the very least undercovered. First of all, he's not the least bit controversial. There is nothing inherently interesting about him except for his suits. He came on this podcast. He could not have been nicer. He is not combative with the media. He was great to me. He was great before the show. He was great after the interview. He thanked me. He told me how much he enjoyed it. I mean, some guys you can't get to do anything. He came on this podcast like 2 days after he got back from the Olympics in Tokyo, and he did the podcast, and he had a blast, and he thanked me for doing it, okay? So, one, I just don't think he's controversial, right? Calipari barks at everybody. He barks at the refs. He barks at his players. He barks at fans. He barks at the media sometimes. Coach K doesn't want to do interviews. Mick Cronin can be feisty, and I love Mick Cronin. Chris Mack was a little bit feisty when he was at Louisville. Tom Izzo is definitely feisty. Juwan Howard, we just talked about the Oscars. You don't need me to get into that again. Jay Wright's just calm, cool, collected, never really seems to get mad. Yeah, every once in a while he'll get after a ref, but he's great with the media. He's great with his players. He doesn't yell. He doesn't scream. I think that's part of it. The other thing I would say, too, and I do think this is a factor, and I do need to mention it, and I think I might have mentioned it on this show before, but there's this narrative that because the Big East is not on ESPN, that they are undercovered. And I never really believed that until this year. But this year was really when it hit home for me. Because, first of all, you had some great programs in the Big East this past season, and really, unless you were a diehard, it was really hard to find coverage of them, especially on the Worldwide Leader. And by the way, I understand why ESPN does not cover the Big East. And for people who are kind of wrapping your head around why not, ESPN does not have the Big East broadcast package. And so the Big East is not a corporate partner of ESPN. Instead, it's Fox. It's the company that I work for. And I think Fox does an amazing job of how they cover the Big East. They do an incredible job of covering the Big East wall to wall, every game, Big East tournament, whatever. But we all know that because ESPN has so many rights packages, they own the entire ACC, the entire SEC, most of the Big 12, most of the Pac-12. Because of all of that, a lot of the Big 10, they cover the teams and the things that are relevant to them, and they are really the epicenter of where college basketball coverage is, right? Jay Billis, Dick Vitale, Jimmy Dykes, Fran Fraschilla, whatever. And so I believe that's part of this too, is ESPN has no incentive to hype up and talk about Jay Wright because they get no benefit out of it, and I do wonder if that's part of it as well. So these are some half-baked ideas. I don't want to belabor the point, but I was just sitting here thinking, like, am I crazy? I feel like nobody talks about Jay Wright. Nobody talks about Jay Wright. So I want to take a minute. I want to give him credit. Congratulations to Villanova, headed to their third Final Four since 2016, and I don't think they get enough credit.